My son looked around the living room and said, "Dad, stop sitting in that chair. It's mine now. You don't own anything here," while his wife laughed beside him. But when I lifted the cushion and showed him the hidden ownership papers, the entire room went silent. His confidence crumbled. I want you to tell me where you are right now as you read this. Are you on the couch, on a bus, lying in bed, standing in the kitchen with your tea? Type it out, because I remember exactly where I was when my life split open. I was in my own living room, in the chair by the window, with the small tear in the armrest, the one that faces the old painting of the lake. Sunlight was falling across the rug like a warm blanket, dust floating in it like tiny stars. My son stood in the doorway with his wife, and he looked around the room as if he were inspecting something he had just bought at a market and wasn't sure he wanted to keep. He put his hands on his hips, took in the bookshelf, the clock that has ticked on our wall for 20 years, the framed photo of his mother holding him on the front steps when he was only 6, and then he fixed his eyes on me. "Dad," he said, casual, almost bored, "stop sitting in that chair. It's mine now. You don't own anything here." His wife let out a short laugh, a quick, glossy sound, the kind people make when they're trying to sound kind but want to be cruel. I didn't move. The cushion under me was familiar, formed to my shape, a small harbor. The clock on the wall kept counting, as if it were counting only for me. I looked at my son's face and saw a stranger who wore his features like a borrowed suit. I didn't shout. I have learned that a quiet voice slices deeper than a loud one. My mouth felt dry, but my thoughts were clean, like the air after rain. I looked at his shoes scuffing my floor, the way his wife leaned into him, her hand lightly on his arm as if she were reminding him to keep going. "You don't own anything here," he said again, like a line he had rehearsed. I wanted to ask him where he learned to speak to me like that, but I knew the answer. Arrogance grows best when it's watered by the approval of people who never paid for what they enjoy. The chair's fabric brushed the back of my fingers. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and the jasmine that creeps along the garden wall. Outside, a kite caught the wind and trembled, its string a thin silver line. Inside, my son tried to take the air from my lungs with a single sentence. If you're reading this at your desk, tell me, have you ever been told that your own life is no longer yours? That your years, your effort, your love are just items to be removed from a shelf? That day, that is what his words tried to do. The first thing that rose up in me wasn't anger, it was memory, the kind that doesn't ask permission. My eyes drifted, not away from him, but behind him, to the mark on the wall where we measured his. Height with a pencil every birthday. There are 15 tiny lines there, with dates. He used to stand straight against the wall and giggle when I pressed the book flat on his head. "Am I taller, Dad? Am I?" His mother would clap, pretending to be shocked by the extra quarter-inch. And then we would celebrate with a silly cake I made from whatever we had. One year, it was a stack of pancakes with candles, dripping with honey. I blinked and saw that same wall now holding a cold, grown man's shadow. I remembered my wife sitting in this very chair, our chair, when the winter was too hard on her bones. She would pull the shawl around her shoulders and read out loud from the same book she loved as a girl. Her voice would warm the room better than any heater. The night she coughed so hard she could not catch her breath, I held her hand right here, my lips on her forehead, and promised her the house would always keep our son safe. I promised her this living room would never forget the stories it heard. The memory pressed against me like a hand on my back, steadying me, while the present tried to shove me forward into humiliation. I looked at my son and saw flashes of another day. A small boy in muddy shoes dragging a cracked plastic truck across the floor, his cheeks flushed from running in the yard. "Don't run inside," his mother would sing, and he would stop, cheeks puffed out, eyes bright, wiping his nose on his sleeve before launching himself at me. He would crawl into my lap and insist that this chair was a pirate ship, and I was the captain, and the rug was the ocean, and the bookshelf was an island packed with treasure. We would sail for hours, and when he finally fell asleep, I'd carry him to his bed, while his mother smiled at us with a love so big it made our small house feel like a palace. How strange it is that love can turn a tiny chair into a kingdom, and greed can try to turn a whole house into a cage. I kept my voice even because that is what I have left, my control. "Is that so?" I said, the words smooth as a flat stone skipping across a quiet pond. His wife made a face like she smelled something faintly sour. "We talked to a lawyer," she said, shifting the handbag higher on her shoulder as if the bag itself were a badge. You don't need to stress yourself with all these old things. It's better this way. Better for whom? I almost asked, but I let the question sit in the air. My son's eyes flicked to the clock and back to me, as if he were checking how long this scene would take before he could move on to the next errand of the day. His voice carried that tone people use when they think the conversation is already over. "It's time, Dad," he said. "I'll handle things from here." The way he said handle made me think of someone picking up a stray object with 2 fingers and dropping it into a bin. I reached for the armrest, not because I needed support, but because I liked the feel of the fabric, the history woven into it. If you're reading this on a train, tell me if you've ever watched a person you raised perform a rehearsed speech in your own home, eyes bright with pride, unaware of the storm gathering right in front of them. I kept remembering the day we moved into this house. It was summer, and the air smelled like cut grass and paint. My wife tucked a small paper packet into the soil beside the front steps. "Jasmine," she said, patting the earth with her fingers. "So, when we come home, it greets us first." We had a picnic on the living room floor, sitting on the newspapers that still covered the boxes. I spilled tea, and she laughed in that bright way that made me feel young, even when I was not. We built our life here, room by room. I learned to fix pipes, to tile a bathroom, to sand a floor. I earned money slow, small shifts adding up, choosing this roof over everything else. When our son was born, we danced in the kitchen with him, his small head in the crook of her neck, our eyes wet with a happiness that we could not name, but knew we were holding like a new, shining coin. These are not mere images to me. They are deeds, payments, receipts written in the language of time and sacrifice. They live in the walls, under the paint, inside the wood. And in the chair beneath me, where the cushion gave a little when I moved my weight, I could feel another memory, folded and kept for a day like this, pressed flat and waiting. My son took a step closer, shoes whispering on the rug. "We'll get a new chair," he said, with a generous smile, as if he were donating something to a stranger. "A better one." I watched the way his wife's laughter settled into the corners of her mouth like a habit. She liked the idea. I could see it. A new chair, a new rug, a new clock, a new story that didn't include me, except as a guest who stays too long. "We need space for our life," she added, raising her eyebrows, looking around at the frames and books like they were boxes to tick off an inventory. "We're a family now." A family. The word landed like a pebble on my tongue. My gaze moved to the photograph on the mantel, 3 faces, my wife's gentle smile, my own awkward grin, my son's open-mouthed joy, cake on his chin. I wanted to tell the woman in the photo that I had kept my promise. I wanted to tell the man that he had done enough. But in the room, the only thing I told them was silence. Silence that made my son shuffle, made his wife adjust her hair. The clock ticked like a heartbeat that belonged to the house itself, stubborn and steady. "You're quiet," my son said, and he sounded almost unsure for the first time. I looked at his hands. They were clean, smooth. My hands, even now, carry the faint scars of nails, the small burns from a faulty stove, a thin white line from the day I replaced the back door, and the blade skipped and kissed me. My hands are a diary. His are a brochure. I thought of the first time. I gave him a key to the front door, how big it looked in his palm, and how proud he was to lock and unlock the door, to be trusted with the sound the lock makes when it slides home. "You remember?" I said, and my voice surprised him because it was so even. "When you were little, how we used to race from the gate to this chair." He blinked, his mouth parting even as a new argument formed behind his teeth. "Dad, don't make this emotional," he said, a little impatient. "It's just how things are." I smiled slowly because patience is a tool I keep sharp. "Things," I said softly, "are rarely just anything." His wife sighed. "We have a schedule," she murmured to him, almost under her breath, but the kind of under the breath that wants to be heard. "We should call the people and tell them it's done." He nodded, and I caught the movement, the rhythm of a plan they had practiced. In another time, I would have laughed. Now, I felt the coolness of thought settling into me like a cloak. I don't need volume. I don't need speed. I don't need their approval. I need time and paper and the truth that sits where they never think to look. I let my palm rest on the cushion, right where the fabric dips. The chair has hidden more sobs than my son will ever know. It has held the weight of the heaviest nights. It has also kept one small, flat secret tucked beneath its skin. My wife used to pat the cushion and say, "This is your throne," teasing when she knew I felt small. After she was gone, the words felt less like a joke and more like a promise I had to keep for both of us. If you're reading this on your phone at midnight, leave a little moon emoji with your comments so I'll know who kept me company in this memory. I say that because nights like this, even when they happen under a bright afternoon sun, feel like midnight inside the chest. The air goes still, the sounds stretch thin. The people in front of you begin to look like characters in a play that isn't very good, and you want to stand up and walk out, but your ticket says your name and you can't leave yet. I watch my son look around the room again, and I could tell he saw furniture where I saw years. He saw items where I saw investments paid in sweat and laughter. "I'll call them," he said to his wife, pulling out his phone. The black screen shone like a small, arrogant mirror, showing his own face back to him. "No," I said, and even the clock seemed to pause for a fraction of a second to listen. He blinked. "No," he repeated, like he had never heard that word before in this house. "Dad, we're trying to make this smooth. We don't want a scene." I breathed in slow, lemons and jasmine, dust and sunlight, and under the cushion, thin and quiet, the shape of something I had placed there years ago, with the care of a man planting a tree he knows he will one day sit beneath. I could see in my mind my wife's handwriting on the corner of an envelope, her careful looping letters that always looked like they were holding hands. I could hear her voice the day we went to the office together, the way she squeezed my fingers when the stamp came down. "For later," she had whispered, smiling like a secret, "for when words aren't enough." If you are reading this while waiting somewhere, know this. The most powerful things in a room are often the ones that make no sound until the exact second they need to speak. My son lowered his phone a little, uncertain now. "What do you mean, no?" he asked, trying to coat the question with sarcasm and not quite managing it. His wife's laughter did not come this time. Instead, she pressed her lips together and watched me with a new, sharper curiosity, like a shopper who thinks she might have missed a price tag. The rug beneath my feet felt firm. The chair's wooden frame creaked a little, a friendly old sound. "You've said enough for today," I replied, not in anger, not loudly, but with the kind of calm that makes people different ages than they were a moment before. I could almost hear something change in the room, a small click, like a lock turning somewhere deep inside the house. My son shifted his weight, and the floorboard beneath him answered with a soft complaint. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the birds outside took a breath. I moved my hand from the armrest to the cushion and let my fingers press into the seam. The fabric yielded, warm from my sitting, and I felt the edge, the one I had felt 100 times and pretended not to, the one I had placed there on a day when I was both a husband and a father, and wanted to be a fortress as well. My son's eyes flicked to my hand, then back to my face. "Dad," he said, this time softer, as if he thought kindness might finish the job that arrogance had started. "Don't make this difficult." I raised my eyebrows, and for the first time that afternoon, I let him see a hint, only a hint, of the smile that wasn't for him. It was for her, for the woman who had chosen the jasmine, for the girl who had grown into a mother who could patch a scraped knee and my bad mood with the same steady hands. The smile was a signal to myself as much as to them. The time for pretending to be small was over. The phone in my son's hand buzzed once, a message he didn't read. His wife cleared her throat, a delicate sound, as if she were tasting the air for changes. I could tell she was thinking of the same things I was. Paperwork, locks, keys, names on lines that matter. I let the silence grow vines across the room. Silence is a craft if you practice it long enough. "Do you remember," I asked my son, "the story your mother always told you when you lost something?" He frowned, confused by the turn. "She'd say, if you can't find it, it's because you're not looking where you put it, only where you wish it was." He swallowed, and I could see he hated that. Memories of her could still walk into a room and sit down without asking permission. "Dad," he started, warning in his tone, but I had already placed my fingertips under the edge of the cushion, feeling the thin world between fabric and frame, feeling the future rustle like a page about to be turned. My fingertips pressed a little deeper into the seam of the cushion, and I watched both of them watch my hand, the way cats watch a curtain move when they know something is behind it. I didn't pull anything out, not yet. Timing is a kind of language, and I wanted my words to land after silence had softened the ground. "Put your phone away," I said to my son, calm as a closed door. He didn't move. His wife made a tiny sound in her throat, a laugh or a warning. I couldn't tell which. "We're trying to keep this civilized," he said, sliding the phone into his pocket with a show of patience. I nodded once, as if he had done me a favor. Outside, the wind nudged the jasmine, and the scent came in through the window, gentle and uninvited, reminding me that the house did not need anyone's permission to be itself. "Civilized," I repeated softly. "Good. Then listen." He leaned back a little, arms crossing, a pose picked up from someone's video or someone's office meeting, the kind of borrowed confidence that looks strong in mirrors. His wife shifted her weight to one heel and studied the room, as if she were deciding what color the walls would be once my stories were scraped off them. "We've already started the process," she said, and her tone had that lightness people use when passing a knife between friends. "We'll be moving some things, starting with the chair. We spoke with a company." She stopped because the doorbell rang, and the sound slid through the house like a steel edge. My son looked at me with a small, fixed smile. "Right on time," he said, and he went to the door. Two men in gray shirts stood on the porch, holding those thin plastic mats movers used to protect floors. Behind them, on the curb, a truck idled with its back open like a mouth. I didn't stand. I didn't need to. The chair did the standing for me. The men nodded politely, asking where to start. My son pointed with an open hand toward me, toward the chair, toward the clock, the rug. He didn't touch anything. He didn't dare. People always gesture big when they know their hands will tremble if they reach. "This side first," he said. The older of the two movers looked at me, then at the chair, then at my son. He understood something wasn't right, but he also understood he was being paid to pretend. "Sir," he asked me, gentle, as if I were asleep, and he didn't want to wake me. "We'll need to move this piece." "Not today," I said. The words were small but heavy. He looked at my son. My son gave him the kind of smile that expects to be obeyed. "We have authorization," my son said quickly, and his wife waved a neat folder like a flag. "Signatures," she added, as if the word itself had power. I nodded toward the folder. "Bring it," I said. She hesitated, then crossed the room and set it on the coffee table in front of me, as if she were placing an offering before a quiet animal that might bite. I opened the folder, neatly printed forms. A letter from a lawyer I knew as a name only, a man whose handshake had never met mine, a draft, transfer of occupancy, an inventory list with the chair circled, underlined twice, dates that were fresh, words that pretended to be decisions. "Read it if you want," my son said, and he tried to make it sound generous, but his impatience leaked out around the edges. "It's straightforward." I slid the top page aside and read the next, and the next. The legal phrases strolled past me like strangers at a market, loud and colorful, but empty. "You didn't pay the last taxes," his wife said, a touch of triumph in her voice, as if she had found the secret panel in a puzzle box. "You forgot, and then we stepped in. That gives us standing." I let my eyes rest on hers, and I saw the little flicker that fear makes when it walks through pride's yard. "You're sure about that?" I asked, and my tone was polite, like a waiter confirming an order. She lifted her chin. "Positive." I smiled the way a man smiles when he hears a familiar song played badly. "Your lawyer should tell you to bring more than a draft and a guess," I said, and I closed the folder and slid it back to her side of the table. The movers waited, their faces carefully blank, their bodies tilted toward the door, as if they could leave their confusion outside with their shoes. I turned to them. "Gentlemen, I won't be needing your help today," I said. "Thank you for your time." The older one shifted his cap and cleared his throat. "Sir, we were told—" "I know what you were told," I said quietly. "You were told by people who don't own what they're pointing at." My son's jaw moved once, like he was chewing a thought that had turned bitter. "Don't make this hard," he said. The words were thin. They didn't even cover themselves. "It's already done." He motioned to the movers again, a small, impatient flick of the hand. The younger mover took a step toward me, stopping when I looked at him, the way a father looks at a child who is about to put a fork in a socket. "Please," he said, and the request landed between us with nothing to hold on to. "Please," I echoed, and now even the clock seemed to pause. "Do you remember," I said, without looking away from the mover, "how old you were when your mother taught you to make tea?" The question wasn't for him, but the room received it anyway. 8, my son said, reflex, the answer coming up from a part of him that still knew truth's shape. 8, I repeated, and she told you the trick was to warm the pot first, to pour hot water in and out, so the tea would bloom when it met its home and not be shocked by it. I turned my gaze to my son and saw that memory stiffen his mouth. This house is not a shock, I said. It is a warm pot. It blooms what belongs to it. He shook his head. You're making this dramatic, he said. It's simple. We're taking responsibility. For what you didn't build? I asked, and the question stood in the air like a ladder he would never climb. His wife exhaled through her nose, a small, frustrated sound. This is going in circles, she said. We don't have all day. Then don't waste it, I answered, and my voice flattened in a way that made both movers straighten. I pressed my palm into the cushion again, letting the chair creak, the friendly old sound of wood that remembers hands. You said I didn't pay taxes, I said, turning to her. You said you stepped in. Tell me the month you think I forgot. She blinked once. June, she said, fast. No, my son said. July. They looked at each other. June into July, she corrected quickly, new confidence stapled to old error. Quarterly, I said. Taxes on this property are quarterly. June into July means nothing. It is a phrase for people who didn't read the schedule. She flushed, a delicate pink rose, and then retreated. My son pulled his phone out again, as if the right answer might appear on it if he touched the glass enough times. Stop, I said, and he actually did. Look over there. I pointed to the small wooden cabinet by the window, the one with the dent from the time the boy he used to be crashed a toy plane into it and then cried because the cabinet was stronger than his plane. Open it. He hesitated. Why? Because I told you to, I said, and the old father in my voice reached out and took the elbow of the grown man who had forgotten he had one. He walked over slowly, opened the cabinet, and stared at the neat row of files inside. Bills, receipts, statements with dates and stamps and initials in the margins. I didn't move. Find the property tax file, I said. He thumbed through, pulled the tan folder out, opened it, and looked. He read the top page. He turned to the next. He stopped speaking. His wife took 2 quick steps and peered over his arm. The movers shifted, that shared worker's sixth sense telling them a job had just changed its name. My son finally spoke, but it wasn't for me. It was for the air, soft and almost surprised. Paid, he said. Paid, his wife echoed, like a faint. Paid, I agreed, and I didn't need to smile. The facts did it for me. He closed the folder too fast and slid it back into the cabinet, as if hiding it would make the pages forget themselves. That doesn't change, he began, and he lifted his chin, ready to jump back onto the script. Everything, I finished for him, my tone still polite. He stopped. Thus, script couldn't find its next line without the lie about taxes. His wife tried to hand me the folder of drafts again. Still, she said with brittle courage, you're old. You can't take care of everything. We can. We want to. I looked at her for a long breath. You want to take, I said. You have not learned the words for giving. The doorbell rang again. It made all of us flinch as if the house itself had cleared its throat. This time, when the door opened, a different kind of face looked in. Not a mover. A man with a thin tie and a thicker smile. Real estate agent. He stepped inside like he had been taught to walk soft on old floors, eyes sweeping the room in one smooth, practiced glance that told him what he wanted to know. He was about to speak when he saw me in the chair, and something in his training told him to shut his mouth. We're not ready yet, my son said quickly. The agent nodded, settling his folder against his ribs like a shield. I can wait, he murmured. No, I said gently. You can leave. He looked at my son, then at me. Sir, I'm here at their request. And I am here by right, I answered, and the agent's face did a small, fast calculation and came up with, back out quietly. Of course, he said, and he left by the same door he came in, his shoes making no sound at all. My son closed the door harder than he needed to. The sound rattled the glass in the frame where our family photo lived. He stared at me, and I held his gaze, not as a challenge, but as a mirror. Why are you doing this? He asked, and there it was. The real question, the one that sits under the practiced ones. Why? I repeated softly. Because this house is a promise. Because your mother's laugh still lives in the corners. Because you were talking like a prince in a kingdom you never bled for. I reached up and touched the little tear in the chair's arm, the one that looks like a crescent moon. And because I am tired of pretending you don't know better. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His wife stepped into the space between us like a small, determined chair leg. We're adults, she said. We make decisions for our family now. I nodded. Make them, I said. Make them with your own walls, your own roof, your own windows that know your names. Make them without stealing the breath from the lungs that raised you. She looked away first. My son rubbed his forehead with his thumb and blinked hard, as if something in his eye was irritating him, and it had nothing at all to do with shame. The movers shifted again. Sir? The older one asked me softly. We'll go. Thank you, I said. He touched the brim of his cap, and the two of them ghosted out, taking the truck's open mouth with them. The room felt larger by exactly 2 men and 1 lie. I could hear a car passing far off on the main road, the quiet scrape of a branch against the window pane, the slow tick of the clock that had watched us grow old. I let the silence swell again, allowed it to rise to the edges of the room, allowed it to show us all what it looks like when noise drops its weapons. My son took a breath like he was about to dive under, and then asked softer than before, Do you want me here? The question was a small, wet thing, and I could feel the child inside it, the boy who brought me dandelions and called them gold. I want you to be a man who doesn't need to take what isn't his, I said. I want you to remember how we taught you to open doors, by knocking. His wife touched his arm, and for the first time since they arrived, her touch didn't look like an instruction. It looked like a question. I leaned forward slightly, the chair answering with its old friend's creak, and slid my fingers under the cushion, not deep, not all the way, just enough for my nails to catch the edge of a paper that had slept longer than it should. Their eyes snapped to my hand. What is that? She asked, leaning, the word thin with sudden hunger. Something your lawyer should have warned you exists, I said. My son shook his head, trying to rebuild the wall my last few sentences had taken down. You're bluffing, he said. There's nothing there. Then why are you sweating? I asked, and I watched him notice the small, cool touch at his temples. He swallowed and looked away, angry at his own skin for telling the truth. I let the paper go and rested my palm flat again. You think ownership is a chair? I said. You think it is a rug, a clock, a list with circles drawn in ink? Ownership is work turned into walls, laughter soaked into wood, names pressed into paper. When the air in the room is so still, you can hear the stamp hit the desk. I looked at the photo of his mother for a breath and then back at him. You are not the first person to confuse desire with right, but you are the first person in this house to do it while looking at your own father. He tried to find anger because anger is easier than apology. His wife tried to find certainty because certainty is easier than doubt. I offered them neither. I offered them time and my quiet, and both are heavier than a shout. Sit, I said to them, nodding toward the sofa they had already planned to replace. They didn't move. Sit, I said again, and this time the word landed on the soft part of my son's shoulders that still remembered being guided. They sat. The sofa sighed and accepted them the way the house had accepted everything over the years, with patient strength. Listen, I said. When your mother and I signed the first papers for this place, the man at the desk used a red pen to show us where to put our names. The pen bled through a little, left a shadow of our names on the next page. He apologized. We laughed. We kept the shadow. We liked that our names bled into more than one sheet. I looked down at the cushion again. We knew, even then, that what we were building had to outlast noise. My son rubbed his palms together now, a nervous habit he had as a boy when asked to speak on stage. His wife watched my hand like it could give birth to something that would change the weather. The house breathed. I breathed with it. I remembered my wife's last autumn, the shawl around her shoulders, the way she gazed out the window and said, Promise me he will learn, not just inherit, learn. I had promised. I am not a man who enjoys breaking promises. I am giving you a lesson, I told them. It may not taste good, but it is how you will keep your own house one day. I slid my fingers beneath the cushion again and felt the thick, friendly edge of an envelope that had slept warm for years. The paper didn't feel fragile. It felt ready. I did not draw it out. I let it rest and let them know by my not yet that there was a later and that it belonged to me. My son started to speak, then stopped. He looked at the cabinet with the taxes. He looked at the door where the agent had vanished. He looked at the chair that would not move and finally back at me, into the eyes that had taught him to ride a bike and to look both ways and to hold his breath underwater and to say sorry when sorry was due. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, and his voice had lost its rehearsed gloss. It sounded like a human voice. I let that sound stay between us for a moment. "I want you to hear me," I said. "I want you to understand the difference between caring for someone and carrying them out of their home. I want you to know that if you had walked in here today with your hands open instead of your fingers pointed, you would have left with more than you came for." He looked at his wife, and she looked at him, and they both found the same hard little stone inside themselves that refused to soften yet. "We still think we should be in charge," she said, but her words didn't have the shine they had when she walked in. "We can oversee things, make sure you're comfortable. Comfort is not the same as respect," I said, "and you have given me none today." I let the sentence sit. It did its work. My son lowered his eyes. He had never been good at looking at truth straight on when it was dressed in his own behavior. A car door slammed somewhere outside, a normal sound that felt, in that moment, like a bell. I thought of how many times the world has touched this living room and then gone on. How many times we've weathered things bigger than two young people with a folder and a plan. I thought of the first time our son slept through the night. How my wife and I stood in the doorway and watched his chest rise and fall, both of us almost crying from relief, our hands touching like two ends of a bridge. I thought of her telling me on a rainy Wednesday when the drain backed up and the roof leaked and money was tight, "We will get through. We always do. We keep the papers where they can find us when we need them." I felt the envelope again, the quiet pulse of its edges. "Now," I said, and both of them snapped to attention, "we're going to start over. You will stand up. You will say, 'Dad, we were wrong to come here like this.' You will say, 'We are sorry.' And then we will see what the house has to say." My son didn't move for 3 breaths. Then he stood. His wife stood with him, not by choice, but because gravity can be made by a sentence, too. He opened his mouth. He didn't find the words. That was all right. They were coming. I could hear them gathering the way rain gathers on the edge of a roof before it falls, heavy and honest, exactly where it's meant to go. My son's mouth opened and closed twice, like he was tasting the shape of the words before letting them out. He looked at me, then at the cushion beneath my palm, and I could see him counting, not numbers, but seconds, like a diver deciding how long he could stay underwater without drowning. "Dad, he began, and the rest of the sentence wouldn't come. His wife shifted beside him, her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. She wanted to drag the words out and arrange them into something that sounded right. But the air in the room had changed. It wasn't listening to them anymore. It was waiting on me. I slid my hand in again and felt the envelope, thick, warm, the edges rubbed soft by time and by the small, steady pressure of a secret kept. I brought it out slowly so they could hear the faint friction of paper against fabric, the small sound that can cut deeper than a shout. The envelope was cream, the color of old light. Across the front, in careful blue ink, was my wife's handwriting, our full names, underlined once. In the corner, her little habit, a tiny drawn leaf next to the date. She always did that on things that mattered, as if to plant them in time. I held it the way you hold a newborn's head, and for a second, I thought the room might bow. My son blinked once, twice. His wife took half a step forward without meaning to, the way people move toward a fire when they don't know yet if it will warm them or burn them. "What is it?" she asked, voice thin, but not cruel now, curious in the way fear is curious. I turned the envelope over. The flap was sealed with a dark red circle of wax, pressed years ago with the tiny stamp my wife loved, the one with the jasmine flower in the middle. My thumb hovered over it. I did not break it with drama. I broke it gently, like waking someone you love. The wax gave with a soft sigh, and I slid the papers free, laying them on the table one by one, the way a surgeon lays instruments in a clean line. The first was a letter, her handwriting again, fuller this time, looping and steady. I didn't read it out loud. I let my eyes move across it, and the words came back to me as if I'd just heard her in the kitchen. Steam on the windows. Tea in our cups. If one day the house has to speak for us, she had written, let it speak plainly. I set the letter down and placed the next paper beside it, the title deed, then the trust declaration. The trust paper had the weight I still feel in my hands from the day we signed it. Large black type across the top. Irrevocable family trust. As settlor, my name. Trustee, my name. Successor, trustee. A woman older than any of us, my wife's cousin who ran her life like a well-kept orchard, and who had promised us, with a firm hand on mine, I will do as you ask if you ever can't. On the third page, underlined in the lawyer's neat red pen, the clause that holds the house like a spine, occupancy reserved to the settlor for life. No sale, transfer, assignment, or encumbrance without written consent of the trustee while the settlor lives. Attempted coercion or undue influence by any beneficiary shall be grounds for removal as beneficiary at trustee's sole discretion, upon documented evidence. I watched the words land on my son's face. He read slow. He always had. Good slow, careful slow, when he was little. Now, it was the kind of slow that happens when the brain is running uphill in the wrong shoes. He looked at the underlined clause again, then to the signature page. He saw my name and my wife's, pressed there with the weight of our hands on a day when rain ticked softly on the office window, and the man with the red pen apologized for bleeding through. He saw the notary's stamp, the date, the small, neat signatures of the witnesses, one of whom used to live across the street and who had baked us a cake the day we moved in. He saw that this was not theater, it was the bones of the house. His wife went pale first. Confident people go pale faster because the drop is longer from where they stand. She took another step and then stopped herself, as if she had found a line only she could see. Our lawyer didn't... She didn't finish. Of course he didn't. Their lawyer had met enthusiasm in a story and filed them where they kept all their quick plans, under soon. He had not met paper with weight. I slid another page forward, a letter from the bank showing the mortgage paid off 8 years ago, final, closed, zero balance, a line drawn through a debt like a road ending at the sea. You were in college, I said quietly, because I wanted the memory to anchor the paper for him. We ate noodles that month. We were happy. He swallowed. His throat worked like he was trying to move a stone. We weren't trying to hurt you, he said. The words were small, and somewhere in them was a boy with skinned knees. We thought... He looked at his wife for help. She didn't have any to give. She only had silence now, and silence can be heavier than the truth you avoided. You thought wanting was the same as deserving, I said. You thought planning was the same as paying. I laid the last 2 items on the table, like the closing of a book. One was a copy of the will, newer than the trust, printed 3 years ago, 2 years after she died. In it, the house did not go where he imagined. It did not go anywhere while I breathed. The other was a slender letter in my handwriting, addressed to him, sealed but unglued, because I had never put it away. I did not open that one yet. Some things arrive when they are called. He stared at the will. His eyes found the sentence that mattered and would matter until I was gone. All real property presently held in trust shall remain in trust for the lifetime of the settlor, and upon his death shall pass in accordance with the trustee's discretion among named beneficiaries, in view of the letter of wishes attached hereto. He looked up at me. In view of, he asked, as if the phrase itself might be a crack to pry at. A guide, I said. A compass that the trustee reads when maps don't help. Your mother wrote it with me. We wrote it after she coughed so hard she couldn't catch her breath until I counted with her. We wrote it while her voice was still strong enough to put a spine in a page. I did not move my hand toward that letter of wishes yet, but I could feel her voice like the low hum that keeps a house warm when the fire is banked and the night is long. His wife spoke again, softer because the room wouldn't accept hard from her anymore. This is a lot, she said, and I almost laughed because it was such a small sentence to put in front of such large facts. We just wanted to make sure things were in order. You said last week you were tired. You said you forgot the kettle and it boiled dry. I nodded. I did, I said. That was the day the neighbor's dog got loose and I was helping Mr. Khan catch it. We talked in the street for 15 minutes about his grandchildren. The kettle forgave me. The house did too. She didn't know what to do with the gentleness in my answer. She had come prepared for a wall or a doormat, not a door that opened and closed on rhythm and reason. My son finally found anger again because it was the only tool he recognized. He pointed at the papers with a finger that shook only at the tip. "You hid this," he said, "under a cushion." The accusation tried to make a sound like winning. It only made a sound like thin metal. "I kept it close," I replied, "because I have learned that the loudest people are often the worst listeners." I tapped the trust clause again, not hard, just once, as if to wake it. And because I promised her, I would not let carelessness with words become carelessness with walls. He looked at the floor. He looked older when he looked at things that didn't look back. "We thought you'd be relieved," he muttered. "We thought you'd be grateful." I wanted to ask him when taking someone's chair had ever turned into gratitude. I wanted to tell him how relief is a flower that only grows from the soil of respect. Instead, I sat deeper into the chair, and the wood received me like an old friend. "If you want to help," I said, "you come with hands open, not empty, not full of orders. You come with tea and time, and you ask what hurts. You do not come with movers." The phone on the table buzzed. The agent again, maybe, or the lawyer they hired, or a friend waiting for a message that said, "Done." My son ignored it. The sound died against the papers and folded back into the room. I picked up the letter in my handwriting, the one addressed to him. "I wrote this the night after your mother's birthday the year before she died," I said. "She was tired, but she insisted on singing to herself to make us laugh. After you left that evening, she asked me if we had prepared enough for you. I told her, yes, and also no. She laughed and said that sounded like me. Then we wrote this." I slid a nail under the flap and opened it. The ink had not faded. The words had not changed their minds while they waited. "I won't read it all," I said, and I scanned until I found the lines that belonged to this particular afternoon. "When you feel big, remember who held you when you were small. When you feel smart, remember who taught you to speak. When you want to lead, remember to knock." I set the letter down and met his eyes. "Your mother's words," I said. "She asked me to write them, because when she wrote them herself, she cried, and she didn't want the paper to keep her tears. She wanted it to keep her firmness." His wife sat. She didn't mean to. The sofa simply called her name, and she answered because standing in front of Truth's table takes more strength than she had today. She pressed her palms on her knees and stared at the trust clause again, as if staring could reverse time or turn ink back into ideas. "What happens now?" she asked, and I heard something new in her, something like the beginning of wisdom knocking from the inside. I looked at my son. "That depends," I said, "on what you say next." He walked to the window, looked out at the small square of garden where Jasmine climbed the rail. The plant had taken the trellis years ago and made it its own shape. It wasn't neat. It was alive. He put his hand on the glass like he might touch the plant through it and then let his hand fall. I didn't think you'd have this," he said, not turning. "I didn't think you'd need it." I nodded at the back of his head. "That is the problem. You didn't think. You wanted." He turned then, and his eyes were red in a way I recognized from scraped knees and broken toy wings. It looked different on a man's face, harder, smaller. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were clumsy, but they were words. They crawled out and stood between us like a bridge with shaky legs. "Say all of it," I told him. "Say what for." He swallowed. "For the movers," he said. "For the lawyer. For the way I spoke to you in your own house. For telling you that you don't own anything here." His voice broke on that last line. He looked at the photo on the mantel, as if the woman there could tell him when to breathe. "For forgetting," he added. And that was the one that moved the air. His wife looked at him, shocked, as if he'd stepped off a path she drew for him. But then I saw her face soften, only a little, enough for a future to fit through if it ever arrived. "And you," I said to her, and I kept my voice even. "I am listening." She clasped her hands together like she was trying to hold something that kept slipping. "I'm sorry," she said. I thought we could make a start by making space. I thought new meant better." She looked at the chair and then away, like a child who knows she has taken a toy that wasn't hers. "I was wrong," I nodded. "Not forgiveness, not punishment. Just acknowledgement. The first brick in any wall worth having." I collected the papers again, not to hide them, but to hold them while I chose what they would do next. I placed the trust back in the envelope, the will, the bank letter. I left my wife's letter outside, face down, as if to let it rest. "There is one more paper," I said. "It is not in this envelope." I pointed to the cabinet. "Top shelf, thin blue folder." He went and opened it. Inside, a single page printed on the clinic's letterhead from last winter. He read the heading and his shoulders sagged. "Cognitive assessment," he said, and shame colored the word assessment like a bruise. He scanned the lines and then the last sentence aloud, voice small. "Mr. S shows no signs of cognitive decline, oriented to time, place, person." He exhaled and closed his eyes. "You knew we'd say it," he murmured, that we should take over." "I knew your fear would dress itself as care," I said. "I knew it would show up with a doctor's name in its mouth. So I went to a doctor with my own name, and I asked him to make sure I wasn't hiding from my own truth. The paper is for me, not for you." He nodded once sharply, like a student being corrected by a teacher he respects. The nod made something inside me unclench, a small knot tied months ago when I watched him begin to measure rooms with his eyes instead of his heart. We stood in our places and listened to the house again. The house liked the quiet. It hummed a little. "Here is what will happen," I said finally, not harsh, simply certain. "You will call the movers and the agent and you will tell them there was a mistake. You will say you caused it. You will pay them for their time." He nodded, not the stiff nod now, but the real one that moves the bones in the neck. "You will come to dinner on Sunday," I continued, "with bread you kneaded yourself and the tea you bring in your own pot. You will sit on that sofa and you will not talk about ownership. You will ask me if I have fixed the squeak on the back door, because you will hear it when you come in, and then we will talk about the roof. I will show you where it needs work. You will hold the ladder. You will learn the weight of a tile." I looked at his wife. "You will bring the recipe for that stew your mother taught you," I said. "You will tell me the story of it while it cooks. If you do not have that recipe, you will call her and ask for it, and you will tell her why." She nodded, and her eyes filled, the way eyes do when they realize they've been reading the wrong line, and the right one has been there all along, quiet, patient, clear. "We can do that," she whispered. "Good," I said, "because then we will talk about more papers, not these, new ones. A plan for the day when I am not here. A plan you don't make over my voice. A plan we make together, with the trustee at the table and the kettle watched." He took a breath like a man who has carried something heavy too far and is ready to put it down. "I'll call now," he said, reaching for his phone. "Wait," I said, and he stopped, thumb hovering over the screen, like a child waiting for permission to cross. I took my wife's letter, the one in her hand, not the legal papers, and turned it over. There, in the postscript she always loved to add, was a line that had held me on darker nights than this one. "Remember, our home is not a place you take, it is a place you make." I read it to them. The words moved through the room like warm water. He called the movers. He was awkward, but he did not blame me. He apologized. He offered to pay their call-out fee, and I heard the older man say, "Happens," with a kindness that fit the size of his boots. Then my son called the agent. He used the word premature. He used the word misunderstanding. He did not use my name as a shield. When he hung up, his shoulders were lower, but not in defeat, in relief. The room let out a breath. Even the picture on the mantel seemed to sit straighter. He looked at the chair then, really looked, not as a thing in the way, but as a place where his father had lived 100 evenings into morning. He looked at the tiny tear on the arm like a moon. "I can fix that," he said softly, surprising both of us. "I know how to stitch leather. I learned on a football." I smiled, not wide, but sure. "Bring your kid on Sunday," I said. "We'll do it together." He nodded, and that was the first good plan we made all day. His wife stood, smoothed her dress even though it didn't need smoothing, and looked around as if seeing a new room where an old one had been. "Should we go?" she asked, not because she wanted to flee, but because she could feel the house would like an hour to settle its heartbeat. "Yes," I said. "Go, and when you come back, knock." She gave me a real smile then, small and clean. "We will." They moved toward the door, and then my son stopped and turned back. He took 2 steps closer, the kind of steps you take toward a cliff when you finally believe the water will hold you. "Dad," he said, and the word was once again the right size. "Thank you." I held his eyes. "Son," I answered, "you're welcome." He hesitated, hands at his sides, the old habit of a hug rising in him and then the faltering. I didn't rescue him. I waited, and it found its own way. He came forward, bent, and put his arms around me. Not hard, not long, but honest. The chair creaked like it was clapping. When the door closed behind them, the living room went full and quiet. I tucked the papers back into the envelope, pressed the flap down, and slid it under the cushion again, not to hide it, but to keep the promise of it close. I touched the wood of the chair, the worn smoothness that years make, and I felt her there, the woman with the leaf in the corner of her dates, the voice that could boil water just by humming. We did it, I told her, and the house, loyal as always, answered with the slow tick of the clock and the breath of jasmine through the window. On Sunday, the knock came the way good knocks do, firm, not loud, respectful of the wood. I let the house answer first. It gave a single creak in the hallway, and then went still. When I opened the door, my son stood there holding a loaf wrapped in a clean towel that smelled like flour and heat, and his wife cradled a dented metal teapot like it was a small, living thing. They didn't step in until I said, "Come," and when they crossed the threshold, they looked at the floor, then at me, and then at the chair, as if the chair might judge them. "We brought what you asked," he said. "Bread and tea," she added, and she tried a smile that didn't reach for any weapons. I took the bread, felt its warm weight, and nodded to the kitchen. "Put the kettle on," I told him. He didn't argue. He walked past me, and as he did, he touched the doorframe with his fingers the way children do when they're remembering how to belong. The kitchen looked like itself. Bright, honest, a little worn in the corners. He moved carefully, not because he didn't know it, but because he finally understood that knowing a room is not the same as owning it. He rinsed the pot with hot water, just like his mother taught him, and he waited while the leaves darkened the water to the color of late afternoon. I sliced the bread with a knife that's older than he is, and the crust cracked under the blade with a polite sound. His wife spread the stew recipe on the counter, handwritten in her mother's neat print, oil splashes like small moons on the card. "She said to tell you hello," she murmured, "and that the secret is cumin last." I nodded. "Cumin last," I repeated, and 1,000 small dinners stood up inside me and waved. We ate at the table that has our initials scratched into the underside. He poured tea without spilling, and when the steam rose, he waited for me to lift my cup first. I didn't make a ceremony of it. I just drank. The tea was strong and clean. "You stitched footballs," I said after a while, nodding toward the chair. "Let's see if that skill remembers us." He wiped his hands, went to his bag, and brought out a small roll of tools: needle, thread, a thimble, a wax cake, a cloth. He knelt by the arm and touched the tear with the back of his finger, gentle, like greeting a scar. "I was rough with it," I said. "It has forgiven worse," he answered, and I heard his mother's humor trying on his mouth and finding it still fit. He threaded the needle, ran the thread through wax the way I taught him to wax a shoelace when he was 5, and then he began. Small, even stitches, not perfect, but steady. "You see how you go too close to the edge?" I asked. He said, adjusting, and the stitch settled into the leather like it had always been, waiting for him to place it. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and looked up. "Better?" he asked. I pressed my thumb along the seam and felt the strength in it, the way mended things can be stronger than they were before. "Better," I said. He stood stretching his back. The kettle sighed, the clock counted, the chair said nothing. It didn't need to. His wife fidgeted with the folded recipe, and then smoothed it flat, as if she were ironing the week out of it. "I was wrong," she said, not looking at me, looking at the paper instead. "I know I already said it. I needed to say it again. It doesn't matter that we thought we had reasons. We didn't have rights." I let that sit. Then I said, "You may bring reasons in this house as often as you like. Just don't try to carry rights that don't belong to you." She nodded. "Yes." After we cleared the dishes, I brought the envelope out. Not the way I brought it out on the day of war, but the way you bring out a family album. I laid it on the table. He didn't flinch. He didn't reach. He waited. "There's one thing you haven't seen," I said. I slid out a page folded separately, a copy of the letter of wishes that sits with the trustee. It was written in both our hands, mine and his mother's, the lines switching between us so closely you could see where I had taken over, when her wrists ached, where she had taken back when the words were hers to say. I read aloud because her voice deserves rooms. We hope the person who receives this house one day understands that a home is a verb. It is cooked. It is swept. It is repaired. It is opened. Whoever gets the walls must keep the verbs. I looked up. My son's eyes shone and didn't look away. I read the next part, the one that would have scared him once, but now landed like a question with an open chair. If a beneficiary shows greed without repentance, he should be last in line. If he shows care, he should be first to the ladder, when the roof needs mending. I folded the letter and put it back. Your mother believed in ladders, I said, figurative and actual. We went outside with our tea to the strip of garden where jasmine had climbed over itself. A tile on the small back roof had shifted in the last storm, and rain had found a way to whisper to the kitchen. I set the ladder, checked its feet, and shook it. "You'll hold?" he asked, and his voice was a child's for a heartbeat. "Always," I said, and I put my hand on the rung. He climbed, slow, correct. He moved the tile back, pressed it, ran his palm along the row to feel the seam. He looked over his shoulder and grinned the way he did the first time he managed to balance on a bicycle without my hand on the seat. "There," he said. "There," I agreed. He came down, feet finding the ground like it was good to be home. We coiled the ladder rope together, the ends crossing and uncrossing the way our days had all week. Back inside, I called the trustee on speaker, the cousin who keeps her life like an orchard, everything pruned, everything fed. She answered on the second ring. "Salam," she said, and the house liked how she said it. "Salam," I answered, and I told her the story in the short version, the one with fewer adjectives. She listened without interruption. When I finished, she said, "I could remove him today." Her voice did not threaten. It inventoried. The clause allows it, attempted undue influence. My son stood very still. His wife put her hand on his arm, but didn't squeeze. I looked at the paper, then at him. He kept his eyes on me. He didn't try to earn anything with words. "Not today," I said into the phone. "Make a note. Keep the file open. Do not swing the axe for a branch that learned to hold fruit." On the other end, she was quiet a long second, then said, "You still speak in riddles." "They work," I replied. "Sometimes." She laughed softly. "I will write what you said," she promised, which meant she would write it the legal way, the way courts like to read. "And I will visit for tea." "Cumin last," I said. "Naturally," she said, and hung up. We sat again, the three of us, not as witness and accused, but as people who had decided to try again. He cleared his throat. "I want to give you something," he said. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small, worn notebook with a rubber band around it. "It's mine," he said. "I started writing expenses in it, what we spend, what we save. It's messy, but I thought we could turn it into a real plan. Roof, porch, the drawer that sticks. I can put in money every month, not to buy anything, to learn the verbs." He slid it across. I didn't touch it yet. I looked at him instead. "Good," I said. "Write the first line tonight. Hold the ladder. Then write the second. Don't call a truck before you call your father." He smiled, sheepish and true. "Yes." His wife leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I called my mother," she said. "I told her what I did here. I expected her to defend me. She didn't. She told me I sounded like a woman who wanted the photo on the wall without the people in it." She looked at the photo on our mantel, the three faces, cake on a child's chin. "I don't want to be that woman," she whispered. "Then don't," I said. "You get to decide every morning." She nodded and pressed her lips together the way people do when they're stopping an old habit at the door and asking it to wait outside. The afternoon slid down the wall, light moving like a slow hand across the rug. We talked about small things that mean more than big ones. Who would oil the hinges? Which weekend the gutters would forgive us if we finally climbed up and cleaned them? How the jasmine had beaten the trellis and needed guiding. He asked if he could take the trust to make a copy. I said no. "It lives here," I told him, tapping the chair cushion with 2 fingers. "You can read it as often as you like. You can even memorize the part that could end you, but it stays here." He nodded once. "Understood." I slid the envelope back under the cushion again, the way you slide a drawer closed that has more than spoons in it. The chair took the weight and gave nothing away. As the light softened, I told them a story they hadn't heard, or maybe they had, and it had slipped through their years. The day we signed the trust, The man with the red pen had asked if we were sure about making it irrevocable. "You can't change it easily," he warned. "People regret cement." Your mother shook her head. "People regret mud more," she said. And she drew a little leaf next to the date, because she liked the idea that something living could grow from something that wouldn't move. We left the office in a rain that smelled like coins, and we laughed because the pen had bled through again. We kept the shadow of our names. We wanted our promise to print itself on more than one page. They stood to go when the sky turned the color of the inside of a plum. At the doorway, he hesitated, then looked at the chair, then at me. "Can I—" he started, and then said it properly. "May I knock next Sunday, too?" "Yes," I said. "Bring the wrench for the squeaky back door. Bring your patience. Bring your notebook." He rolled the strap of his bag once around his hand and smiled. "I will." She held up the recipe card. "Cumin last," she said, and somehow it sounded like a pledge. "Cumin last," I echoed. They stepped outside. He turned back once and said, "Dad." I answered, "Son." He didn't add anything. He didn't need to. Some names are whole sentences. When the street was quiet again and the house had done its little settling dance, the tick, the sigh, the small, soft complaint of old wood remembering the day, I sat in the chair. I leaned back and closed my eyes, and the room raised all the sounds it has kept for me. Her laugh, his small feet running on a winter morning, the whistle of a kettle that never boiled dry when love was watching. I slid my hand under the cushion and touched the envelope for the smallest moment, not to check that it was there, but to thank it for waiting. Then I left it and let my fingers rest on the stitch seam my son had made. The thread was new, the leather was old, together they held. I thought of the sentence I want him to carry longer than any paper. Families don't take what's yours and tell you you're not welcome. Families knock. Families lift. Families learn the verbs of a house and then teach them to their children. We don't always get it right at the first door. Sometimes we arrive with a truck when a teapot would have done. Sometimes we forget to knock. But if we mean it, if we are willing to say sorry and mean it with our hands, the house will give us another Sunday. If this story found you where you are, on a bus, at your table, in a quiet room that knows your name, tell me where you felt the turn. Tell me where your own house keeps its verbs. Like, share, comment, and subscribe.